Yeah, thanks so much, both of you, and thanks for having me here today. We love Trailhead and Boise Startup Week and all that you do down there. I am from Northern Idaho. We're based in Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls area, so quite a ways north. And I'm the founder and CEO of Snacktivist Foods. We are a food systems focused food company that makes a line of ancient grain based baking mixes and finished products that are all focused on really reinventing the grain industry, adding a lot more value to it and restructuring it so it's more sustainable, healthier, and better for farmers. And so right now we do have a line of baking mixes that we're selling food service online and actually moving into broader retail distribution. We piloted a finished product cookie line last year, still looking for the perfect partner to relaunch that probably into 2021. We found a wonderful co-packing partner that we're really excited about. So we'll be revisiting that as well, as far as other great finished products that can get ancient grains into the hands of consumers and make them accessible and easy to use and enjoyable to eat. So all of our products right now are gluten, egg, and dairy free. However, we're really dedicated to working with farmers on a broader level, so that also will bring us into probably wider utilization of grains beyond just gluten-free grains. We work with some amazing farmers that are really redefining the industry for the future. So we want to tell their story. Thank you.
Apologize, I unmuted myself on accident. I muted myself right after. Give us a sense of how long Snacktivist has been around, how big your team is, and maybe, how much product you ship so we get kind of a sense of the scope of your venture.
Yeah, we're still quite small. We launched actually a few years back in very, very small form. I'm an RN, and until last year I was working at least 3/4 time at the hospital in the ICU. And so it wasn't until Trail Mix happened that we really said, hey, look, let's really focus on this and take it from just a side hustle kind of nights and weekend project, bring on a really great team, which we've now secured a phenomenal team to move us forward, both on supply chain side and also sales and marketing. You guys are very familiar with Meg Carlson. She's leading our sales and marketing team, and she's amazing. And also recently recruited a gentleman who, rumor has it, is going to be moving to Boise with a really strong background in supply chain, farmer direct sourcing, flour industry. So we're really excited about that. We're still in the small stage of we're under 200K a year in revenues, but looking to really now go into that hockey stick projection trajectory now that we have the pieces in place and the people in place to really be scalable into the future and awesome relationships with retailers. So
thank you for that. Yeah, I think that gives me, the audience, a little bit better understanding of with respect to Snacktivist on where you are in the life cycle of your organization.
Yeah.
And on that note, Scott, if I can invite you to share a little bit about yourself, Melt, as well as maybe where Melt is in its life cycle with respect to size, growth, and quantities that you ship, for example.
Well, good morning, and then thanks for inviting me as well. I've worked with Venture College and the team there. I've had a lot of opportunity to interact with the Trailhead, both amazing resources for entrepreneurs. So I thank you first for what you do. Let me tell you a little bit about me. I am 2 years into the food service business. Spent my entire career in electronics in the Silicon Valley in manufacturing, and came back to Boise to start a consulting group and help small businesses grow. And that's where I learned about Melt Organic. Melt was founded by Signia Rapp in Haley, Idaho. She had a number of chronic conditions related to her diet and health, and needed to start finding ways to make food that was cleaner and had fewer chemicals in it that she was so sensitive to. So she started Melt back in 2007 and did an amazing job at growing it, brought on a new CEO, And for 5 years or so, they had some really good growth. 2017, that growth had stalled, and 2018 was a year that they did, I think, 2.5 million in sales, which was flat from the year before. And I came in at that point in time to help them figure out how to realize the amazing potential of what was really almost ahead of its time. Butter made from plants that is organic, had zero chemicals in it, no artificial additives, and really was an amazing product. And we hired in a new team. We brought in Andy Gustafson, the vice president of merchandising for Albertsons. We were lucky enough to get Jim Linford, who's the former COO of Garden Burger, the original plant-based burger company, and also a 19-year veteran of Kellogg, who was a director of supply chain there. So we brought a great team in. We were fortunate in getting some real traction. We went from 2.5 to 4.2 last year. We're at 4.2 already this year, and we're looking for an $8 million year. And we've just launched a new line of cheesy spreads made from both red lentils and chickpeas from Northern Idaho. So locally sourced grain products turned into a creamy, velvety cheese that we think will also set the world on fire, just like butter has.
The most important question, where can I buy that right now, Scott?
Almost anywhere you go. And thanks for asking. On our meltorganic.com webpage, there is a Find My Store. And we're in 13,000 stores across the US and Canada. We also sell in Mexico and Australia, Costa Rica, and Puerto Rico. So it will be at a store near you, but if you have a hard time finding it, look us up on the web.
We'll do. You know, you bring up something that I failed to appreciate early on when I found out that Melt was based in Boise. This was after I've been buying your product. I found out that, you guys are local. The Melt butter sticks is really what has got us hooked these days. And thank you for coming up with that product line. But give us a sense of, your reach and your distribution for a local company. I mean, you're distributing worldwide. That's pretty amazing. What's the scope of your international business?
We started in the U.S. and I think it's a learning experience for all new food companies. Dominate your local market first before you try to stretch, because you really want to have some strong legs before you try to cross those borders. We had a dominant position. That is a tough, grinded out job to gain distribution. You have to start to try to create relationships with buyers at banners in retail stores. Banners are things like Albertsons and Kroger, Fred Meyer. And being new, it's tough because they don't know who you are. They're not sure why they should even listen to you. So there's a lot of salesmanship and a lot of craft to get access to those buyers and get on the shelf. That is step one. And once we got on the shelves and started generating what we call velocity, which is the number of units you'll sell in a store in a particular time period, you get the velocity up and other stores start calling you. And Canada was easy because they're an English-speaking country. And the international trade rules with Canada are as easy as it gets for US companies. And so for us, it was a great market. Today, 23% of all of our sales come from Canada. And that's been very helpful for us. Then we've started to selectively look at other countries when we find a strong distributor who has a commitment to the market and who really has a commitment to our product. And that's a slow process. We're still growing in the United States and Canada, and we'll look at international opportunities when they make sense for us, but we're not expanding just to expand.
So it sounds like your primary focus still is to get those strong legs under you domestically before you focus too much on cross-border sales.
And it has been an amazing ride. As I mentioned, Andy Gustafson is a veteran in the retail sector for grocery. our velocity, the number of units we sell in a store, is up 183% in the natural channel and 102% in the conventional channel. That's before the COVID epidemic hit. Of course, that's a much higher number now, but I think it's a testament to his skill that he's been able to drive the popularity and the velocity of our products in the stores. That's the second point. Number one is distribution. Number two, to stay there, you really have to drive that velocity.
Joni, if I can invite you to comment on the distribution side that Scott's bringing up, the difficulty of being relatively small and potentially unknown to some of these, distributors and banners, as he said. Help us appreciate the challenge and how Snacktivist kind of navigates that.
Yeah, that is actually the biggest challenge, probably of all, because there's a lot of other challenges that fall into making that happen, from capital to talent to supply chain and marketing. But really getting audience with buyers is extremely hard without some sort of warm introduction. Like, you really need somebody to vouch for you or make a connection happen. It's very rare that you can just cold call somebody and get anywhere. Trade shows make that a little bit easier and can break down some of those barriers. But again, access to distribution is the number one thing. We have so many retailers in the queue waiting for us to get onboarded with either KeHE or Unify. But again, it's an administrative hurdle, as well as a financial hurdle, as well as a social hurdle, because you really have to, you don't just call up a distributor and say, hey, get us into your system. It has to be requested. There's a lot of kind of cultural nuances that one must understand. And in that way, Melt is great that they have a very seasoned team that understands how that culture works. I didn't have that team before, and it was very difficult. I'm super grateful for our independent retailers because they are accessible to small brands, and they've been really, really supportive of our brand, which is really what has given us our traction. But, like you said, as you get bigger, now we have a team that has better access. We've got a fabulous brokerage team, and they're expensive, but they are so critical for us to make the inroads into the larger markets. And for us, we've actually had most of our support has come from out of state for us as a brand. You can find us in other areas, but it's harder to find us in Idaho. So interestingly enough, I don't know why that is, if it was just a early adopter markets were elsewhere or not. But Amazon is our number one channel right now, and that's an interesting disruptor to the grocery business, and that you don't have to rely on the traditional channels of distribution, getting permission from a buyer, etc. It's there. There you are. You build your story and you have direct access to consumers there. So for us, it's been indispensable having the consumer discovery process happen on Amazon, and it's our number one sales driver at the moment.
That's interesting. So you found a non-traditional channel to sort of help you overcome those cultural and other bureaucratic hurdles that you talked about.
Absolutely.
I didn't consider ever buying food off of Amazon myself, but that's interesting.
It's a big industry, and direct to consumer grocery is exploding at a very rapid pace. COVID has poured gas on that fire globally. And so, when you do look at Amazon, there's access to foreign markets as well. We're looking to launch in a platform called Naver in South Korea, which is their equivalent to Amazon. So we are actually working with foreign markets right now to penetrate before we even really have a huge presence in our home state. So it's kind of an opposite thing, which was contrary to what I thought when I started the company. I really thought it would be the opposite. But when we talk to our Korean buyers, they import everything. They're a grain-based society, so they love what we're doing and they want us. So we'll go where we're wanted, which is great. Mm-hmm.
Exciting.
The internet makes that very easy.
Well, hey, let's make sure there are more places in Idaho where I can buy your product before Korea does to that.
We would love that. That would be wonderful.
But Nick, you had a question. Go ahead.
Yeah, Joni, you and Scott both touched on this briefly, but maybe if both of you could just tell us a little bit about at the start of this pandemic, what what did your business look like? What was your response like to it? What, shifts did you make within your business? Has it been, have you seen increased demand? I think in the food industry, as we've all heard, people have been hoarding food.
Yeah.
And, I'm assuming that could be good for your businesses. But would just be curious to what your response was like when it started and how that's evolved over time.
Scott, do you want to answer that first?
Well, yeah, I'll start in. I always look back to our mission, which is improving people's lives, starting with the food on their plate. And when the COVID epidemic began, we started asking ourselves in team meetings how it affected our customers. And our focus on our customers was really what framed how we moved forward, what action items we took. And we sort of put it into three main areas. Outgoing sales, how do we make sure at the store level that sales are there? And incoming supply, our supply chain. One of the things that we were really concerned about was whether it was going to affect transportation and farmers who were growing and delivering crops to us for our food. And finally, in the social media circle, companies our size don't have the kind of dollars to do anything but social media and very limited sort of Facebook postings and boosts. So we wanted to make sure we framed on social media the crisis without overwhelming our audience. We wanted to make sure that the stores had adequate supplies of our product. We wanted to make sure that we were working on getting redundancy in our supply chain so that we had multiple vendors that we could pull raw materials from. I think as we were able to focus on those three, other things came up, but there's only so many things you can work on at once. And I think those were super important for us.
Yeah, definitely. Supply chain still is a little concerning for us. Honestly, we rely on co-manufacturers also, like Melt. We don't produce things in-house traditionally unless it's a small prototype. And with COVID, and I mean, my husband and I are both RNs, so we're very closely associated with the medical community. My husband still is one of our lead trauma ER nurses here in our community. And, we weren't sure what to prepare for, but we knew people would need to eat. And so we really stepped it up ahead of time, kind of seeing what was coming, having friends around the world that were saying, things are really actually quite scary here in China and in South Korea. And you guys need to take steps now early on to be prepared for what's happening. And, and then it actually was a great comfort to us that as a brand, we could provide comfort to people when they were in a position of being really scared and not having a lot of security and a lot to rely on, that they could still, bake at home with their family and have something that could anchor them and make them feel a little bit more comforted in such an uncertain time. And so, we're a very small team, but at the time I was like, let's create a Facebook group called Quarantine Cuisine where people can just share what their challenges are in the kitchen. A lot of people are learning to cook for the very first time. It's not a time for showing off how organic or how gluten-free or how, holier than thou your cooking is. It's like, we're just in survival mode. People are making rice from scratch for the first time in 45 years, things like that. And so we really tried to reach out to our community and provide channels for them to, get new ideas and to share what their accomplishments were at a time, the first time in most people's lives that they suddenly can't go to a restaurant and just buy food out. So, but the supply chain was a big issue for us. And in fact, our co-packers were quite impacted for a while, and we had to reshuffle. Our food service channels all disappeared overnight. So we had a lot of inventory in food service bulk because that's one of our predominant channels, was servicing breakfast places and juice bars and eateries that serve, waffles. Our waffle mix is very popular throughout the West and served in a lot of locations. And, we were moving towards trying to get accounts with larger corporate cafeterias, cruise lines that we were pitching to an airline contract. Those kind of things rapidly deteriorated. So I have a really tenacious team, and we literally, all hands on deck, we converted our small little space into a resizing station, and we were able to keep up with 4,000% increased demand. with just hustling and transferring the sizes of our food service pouches down to being retail pouches, or we just hustled and threw out in a matter of 24 hours 5-pound pantry bags for people that were like, oh no, like I can't afford little tiny retail bags on Amazon because I have a big family, but I need food. And so we said, well, hey, we've got all this food service excess. Let's rebag it into 5-pound bags and just sell it direct via our website on Shopify and on Amazon so that people can have the security of food in their pantry. So I'm really proud of my team that we were able to pivot and reconfigure that quickly. It was like a 5-day turn and burn process, and we had all of our food service converted for retail direct to consumer.
That is amazing. So basically, with the demand drying up on the food service side, you know, how do you make decisions like that when you are a food product entrepreneur? So the reason I'm asking is, you know, your inventory, your product is not, you know, shelf stable forever, and you know you
Correct.
can't handle it like you could, you know, with other physical products. So I just see so many challenges and hurdles, and even rebagging food and finding a different, you know, consumer and channel to get that. How do you make those decisions on the fly with tons of products sitting on your shelf, or can you take me through that? It sounds like a hard decision to make.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it was like safety focus. Like, you know, we had to deal with the health department first, just because we were changing what we were doing. And with being an allergen friendly food, there was a lot of safety, consumer safety things that we had to focus. And we had to make sure that we were accommodating this adaptive process in a way that would be safe and efficient. And so, yeah, it was kind of on the fly, to be honest, there, those first few days, in fact, because from a nursing perspective of where we were operating from, hearing a lot of inside information from the health department, from the epidemiology standpoint. I mean, I come from a science background and healthcare background. It was very clear that it was not going to be something that was going to just be a 1 week or 2 week ordeal. From my husband and I's perspective, we were very sure that it was going to be a 1 to 2 month commitment to shut down. Just from our perspective as healthcare and science people. So that made it easier for us to say, okay, let's not just sit on this inventory hoping that food service comes back. I really hope food service comes back. It is coming back slowly, but it's not coming back at the volumes that it was before, right now, for us anyways. So, you know, it was, you know, we weren't going to have consumers out of stock of things that they need just because we failed to adapt to converting their accessibility points. Like, we opened up our shop to people to stop by and buy 25-pound bags, which we had never done before. But people were scared and they wanted bulk food. So we said, well, we can do that. So yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it wasn't graceful every day, I'll put it that way. There were challenges, but you know, I just have a really great committed team that, because we're a mission-driven company, our mission is to make sure people are fed and fed healthy food. So when you put that first every day when you get up in the morning, it makes it a lot easier to make all of the variables align behind that.
Yeah, that's part of the fascinating aspect to me about food is I sort of start taking it for granted, and I don't think about the fact that, you know, it's such an intimate thing. You know, it's food, and to your point, yes, the pandemic, I found myself baking all of a sudden with my daughter.
Yeah.
Something I never thought I'd be doing. You know, we're watching, you know, Nail It. It's a show on TV, so she watches other people bake, and we mimic it. To that point, we had to start buying gluten-free flour in bulk, in larger quantities.
Yes.
But so, you know, both you and Scott have said this, that, you know, your mission is they're familiar, you know, they sound familiar, and you put the customer first, and it sounds like you try to make decisions, your business decisions, with the customer first and foremost in mind, customer centricity. Scott, similar to Snacktivist, did the pandemic early on cause any shifts in your demand and channel, or you know, like Snacktivist, they went from the service industry supplying restaurants and coffee shops to consumers. Did you experience that kind of shift in your distribution channels, or did you not?
Absolutely. I think that everything that Joni said those are really excellent examples of how to react quickly like small businesses should. That's one of our key advantages over bigger businesses, is the ability to change direction. I think that we had an idea in mind well before this crisis came around, that we felt that the way we set up our business needs to address flexibility and adaptability. And that's why we started in mid-2018 to diversify our channels so that we weren't reliant on grocery. And that if grocery were to take a dive, short-term or long-term, that we had other channels that may move in the opposite direction. We began to penetrate the private label channel. We sell butter to Sweet Earth, a division of Nestle, where they make baked goods. And we make ingredients to make all the buns for a number of hamburger chains. And that sort of broadening of our base increases the stability of the company. That the over-reliance on one channel starts to help us be more stable, and then being more stable gives you more flexibility when you're on such a solid rock. And when it first hit, we knew that grocery would go up. Someone started talking about pantry loading. It was the first time I'd ever heard of that term. I guess that's a industry term. And we moved a lot of our supply, like Joni, we moved a lot of our supply that was scheduled for commercial production and food service production to restaurants. And we moved that back into retail. So we actually had plenty of production. That production that was originally scheduled to run for food service and restaurant service, we moved back to retail. Our sales doubled overnight, and we have a pretty good supply chain, and we have some vendors that we worked with for a long time. I think that partnerships with your vendors is super important. That if you're simply out there working on price every day, your vendor will be just as fast to drop you as you are to drop them. So having some loyalty and a relationship with your vendors is super important on the partnership. I'll tell you, in manufacturing, when I started, a relationship with our co-packer was not good. It was somewhat confrontational. And today we operate purely as partners, and our co-packer worked with us to come up with a multi-part plan to keep employees safe, to keep the production plan moving forward, and to be able to have all of alternative strategies if the COVID virus invaded the manufacturing floor. And we're super grateful that it hasn't, and that we haven't had to implement some of those second level strategies. But certainly having partnerships with your vendors and your distributors and your manufacturers has been key, along with having a more diverse supply chain.
Yeah, that's a really good point. With an omni-channel approach, it does lend itself to a more stable cash flow for a small company, especially because you can pivot and you have your feet in a couple of different ponds. It's really, really important. But I love how Scott talked about that relationship with the co-packer, because it is so critical, and they really are partners. And then this has exposed that there is a lot of vulnerabilities with our food manufacturing people that we rely on to feed us from field to factory. And, with the outbreaks happening at a food manufacturing level, I mean, we've all heard it, meat packing plants have been hit really hard. And that is a vulnerability that Americans had not thought about, I don't think, really ever. I mean, Snacktivist has always said food security is national security. That's one of our mantras. But I just think it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities in that population of people that we're reliant on to get food to our table. And I was really grateful to having amazing relationships with our co-packers. Like Scott said, it can be kind of adversarial sometimes. It can be a little confrontational. But when they become friends and you become true partners, it was really a relief to be able to go to our co-packers in the heat of COVID and actually go out on the lines and see what they were doing to keep their workers safe. And I was so impressed with our partners, the steps that they took to make sure that they could still increase their productivity and scale with demand while keeping their workers safe. It was very impressive, and I was super proud to do business with those partners.
Yeah, I think, both of you touched on the importance of partnerships, and I think in any business, but in particular in the food industry, those are critical, and not only for your business success, but your food safety, and a variety of other things. One just quick reminder to the audience, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat and we will get them to Joni and Scott. And I think Scott may have just put a note in there that perhaps we can talk about financing and funding for you all as you go through this time. Obviously, raising capital in this environment is different than what it was beforehand. And so just be, kind of interested to hear, for you all as you plan forward, what are some, just high level tips or best practices that you can think about? And maybe we'll start here with you, Scott, of just what are you doing to set yourself up for success, both in the short and long term from a capital perspective?
Yeah, I know that's super important for a lot of food companies out there who may be strained right now from the high sales volumes and the ability to finance inventory and receivables or put out new products. I know that it's been really hard to get any sort of category review with retailers right now because they're so involved in just keeping food on the shelves. So finding ways to get funding. I would say, first of all, there's a couple of adages. One is never say no to funding if it comes by, because it may seem like you don't need it at the time, but in the food business, I've learned that you need more than you think you need to get to certain levels. And that sort of brings me back to, before we even talk about funding, Nick, I know you and I talked about this earlier this week. It's so important to establish credibility that you have set goals, targets, KPIs. Investors are really concerned about concrete numbers, how many subscribers you have, or what your sales are, or how many stores you're selling in, or what your velocities are. To establish those, to be clear about what you're doing, to understand what a good number versus a not good number is, and know that you're in the green on those numbers. And when you raise money, be very clear about what you're going to do with it and what you hope to get out of it. While investors want to know what the details are about what you're going to use the money for, they want to know what it's going to look like in your company when you've spent that money, when you've invested it into the growth of the company, that you've achieved those. Once you have set a cycle of raising, setting objectives, achieving those objectives, then coming back to the market to say, I'm ready, I ate breakfast and now I'm ready for lunch. You'll get more investors receptive to the idea that this team knows how to use money to grow business. And I can see that there's an end in sight. So I think that's a super important one. In light of the current environment, a lot of investors we've experienced, we recently raised almost $1 million in the last 3 months. We had quite a few investors who were very enthusiastic about investing in Melt Organic. And when the stock market took a 30% dive, everyone had a rethink about how much money they really had for investing in startups. So I saw that as a real warning sign early on. So we did some creative things around funding. I'm curious to know what Joni has experienced on this or what she's seeing out there, because Joni, I know that you're starting up a fundraising process too.
Yeah, we are. In fact, we were going to, open up a tranche earlier in the spring, right when COVID hit, like March. And, just really had to rethink what our strategy was, because we are so early stage. I mean, we're really in that higher risk zone of seed round financing, which is very tough place to be when you have a recession. But food being rather recession proof, that part is helpful. But still, we ended up pushing everything out because also we needed all hands on deck. I couldn't be full-time fundraising when we're desperately trying to keep up with like a growing Amazon demand that just doesn't stop. And that's been really tough. I'm really grateful for what federal things were out there to assist. EIDL and those kind of advancements have been really helpful to help cover some of our purchasing. But like Scott mentioned, we're definitely in that category where our purchasing has been bigger than what our cash flow coming from our vendor relationships are. There's a cash flow mismatch happening right now, which is very typical of high growth. And that's a tough one to solve in a recession. So we're actively raising money right now. I did a pitch last week, and so we're looking for partners to come in, and but it's just such a changing environment right now with all of the things changing. It's tough to do forecasting when a lot of your company was focused on food service channels and things, and suddenly they're gone. It really makes for a very dynamic pro forma. And like Scott mentioned, with investors really wanting to know what every dollar is going for and what the ROI on every dollar will equate to, that's just really kept me on my toes as a new CEO, not coming from a finance background, but from a product development, health sciences, nursing background. So it's been a great learning curve, and I'm just grateful I have a lot of really incredibly smart people around me that have added to my learning curve and mentored us through this process.
Yeah, there's a recurring theme that the managing the cash flow seems to be a recurring theme for food product businesses.
Yeah,
it makes sense. You have to finance your inventory, as Scott mentioned. You typically are financing receivables. I mean, payment terms are probably 90, sometimes 180 days with some of your customers. So that omni-channel approach is even more interesting to me now, because as you approach one of those big banners, as Scott said earlier, you would really have to be ready for them to pull the trigger, meaning you would have had to have the inventory and your cash is already tied up in product and potentially receivables. So it sounds like that omni-channel approach really is also lucrative in terms of managing your cash flows.
Well, yeah, because you can be really strategic if you find the right partner that can pay you sooner. It's worth it, even at a lower margin, to help close that gap, right? Like if you have a certain percentage of your accounts that can do that quick turn and burn, like Amazon platform takes a lot, but they pay you quicker than a traditional retailer would. So there's a benefit to that, in that it can help with the cash flow issues. So it's dynamic, that's for sure. And I think every food company I know that I've spoken with, they're all in the same situation right now. Cash flow is the biggest issue at the moment, because no one was expecting a surge in baking in spring, when typically everybody's out of the house going to Little League games and soccer games and out and about. People don't bake in the spring very often. So we were all caught at having our lowest inventory of the year. When you are doing your forecasting at the beginning of the year in my sector, you do not plan on having a surplus inventory anytime in the second quarter, ever. You start to ramp up going into the third quarter when people go back to their kitchens in August when school starts again. So it's been really, really tricky.
So is the proposition, on that note, is the proposition to investors, hey, invest into me, invest into my growth? Or is this more of a proposition of, because I see demand surging, is this more of a invest in my profit growth as opposed to my revenue growth? Is that ring a bell in terms of the conversations you've had?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Both of those angles are both correct, because profitability goes hand in hand with scalability in the food sector, because profit is completely hinging on your potential to bargain at volume. And, that's the whole dynamic equation. So
Scott,
scale is king.
On that note, what Joni just said, really, have you noted a shift in priority, or are investors asking you different questions because of this whole profit growth versus revenue growth. As you raised that $1 million, did you notice
It's
different conversations than before?
it's one of the it is always one of the top questions that investors have, regardless of the economic environment. As entrepreneurs and business growers, we're trying to figure out what that perfect balance is. There's never perfect, but how do you grow sales and try to conserve cash, because they're working against you. You would love to put every dollar you could into sales growth, into promotions and advertising, which can be ungodly expensive. But the cash flow burn may cause some investors to shy away from you. So, but at the same time, if all you do is try to be profitable and be very mindful of a business that is that's earning its keep and paying for its own goods and services, you will sacrifice revenue growth. At the end of the day, we're looking to exit these businesses, and strategic acquirers are looking for companies that are growing fast in the retail channels. So it is a constant weighing back and forth between how much cash should I let go out the door versus how much I want sales to grow. That's different for every startup and early stage food company. It's something you have to weigh with your investors. You have to look at sort of where you are and where you think you're going. But it's not just this current crisis that causes us to do that. But I think the scales tip decidedly more in the camp of, if you are finding ways to minimize your cash burn, you're more attractive to investors who don't see an endless pit out in front of them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Scott. It's a trade-off. You can sometimes be a little too frugal, and that hampers growth, which also isn't attractive to a certain group of consumers. So it's how you're getting to the end game strategy that really, it's constantly needing to be reevaluated.
I wish I could see into the minds of some of the investors, because the question is always, how much growth would you like to see? Currently, we're growing about 60% a year. And I wonder, is 60 enough, or should it be 100? And if the money I need to spend is 100, gets us to 100, is that cash flow burn, is it scary for investors to look at? So I would advise anyone out there who is running a food company to spend as much time, once again, with relationships with investors, to where they get to trust you enough that they will give you the inside scoop on what is it they're really thinking. And each investor is a little different, but the more investors you can form personal relationships, the more you get a sense for how investors in general are feeling about the food business industry and your company in particular.
So you both have touched on just the importance of relationships and of growth, in particular with relation to the investor standpoint. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe some steps you've taken during this time or others to position your brand in front of new customers, and what that customer acquisition looks like, both in a time like this and before, knowing that you have a unique value proposition, both your companies. But just talk a little bit about kind of what a new customer acquisition looks like, and how you've positioned yourself to do that during this time.
Well, I can start with that. As I mentioned before, we've spent a lot of time acknowledging the current crisis in our social media channels without overwhelming the audience, making sure our followers can relate to our content, and try to keep their spirits up, and and sort of show them that that we're a net positive to their life, and framing discussion items around how baking and cooking can be a great stress reliever. We posted a lot of quick, healthy snack ideas to inspire parents who were dealing with kids suddenly at home on a full-time basis, to get them snacks that were delicious and that were good for them. We also shared morning and evening activities on the web to help inspire mental and physical motivation, little things for parents to do with their children, and overall create those emotions and situations that our customers are identifying with right now. So social media has been the best way to interact. Our retail strategies, Nick, are always planned at least 6 months out. So we're finished with our second half promotions for July through December already. There's not much we can do about that. So for us, it was the social channel allowing us to be there, and getting new customers. A lot of times what we found is, as long as we had product on the shelf where our competitors were having stock out issues, people were picking us up because there wasn't anything on the shelf. And I'm okay with that. I'll take a new customer any way I can get them. But one of the ways of driving trials is just to make sure your product is on the shelf. So while we did what we could in social media, we're happy to take advantage of the fact that we did have supply on the shelf.
Yeah, that's an important point. I think for us, it's interesting because the grain and flour and baking industry has really gotten attention. It's been a stagnant category for a very long time. Center aisle's been shunned for the last 10 years. And there's been a movement there trying to really breathe life back into this tired category, which is baking and grains and carbs, and like giving people permission to love grain again has been really pivotal to our whole messaging for the year. But COVID really put a spotlight on that, because a lot of people who had kind of written off grains as a category for the last 5 years, paleo, keto, grain-free, whole, like all these diets that have gone around, suddenly they rediscovered this whole new category. And now they're really determined, like, hey, you know what? I want to figure out how to have carbs in my life again, and have grain-based foods in my life again, but not have them be like the evil food group of grains and carbs as we had grown to know it. So that's been a really interesting, consumer discovery experience for us. And, having just brought on a CMO and just brought on a new marketing firm in the middle of COVID, regretfully, we could have probably captured and leveraged more of that consumer discovery experience had we, the timing been a little bit different. But it's been really interesting for us, like talking to customers and people on Amazon that say, I haven't eaten anything grain-based for years because I've been paleo for the last 6 years, and I just discovered your waffle mix and it makes me feel good. They like it, and it's really giving them that satisfaction and sustainability piece that they've been looking for. So it's interesting.
Very cool. In an effort to, we're butting up against time a little bit, in an effort to sort of wrap things up, if I could ask each of you to just take a step back from your day-to-day activities inside of your own business and think about other food product entrepreneurs who are potentially struggling to move their business forward due to all the reasons we just covered in our discussion. If you could give them some inspirational buckets of focus. So what is it that they should be focusing on? And that's based on your recent experience with this pandemic and the crisis, that you think has helped you in these last few months stay focused and move your business forward. So if there's like a bullet point list of 1, 2, or 3, what would that be so other food product entrepreneurs can leverage that to their benefit? Joni, if I can start with you.
Oh no. Okay. I think just number one, always keeping a consumer focus. If you always make the consumer's needs number one, a lot of the other things will fall into place, because then you're always rallying behind solving their problems. And I think that, that really is my number one focus, is just always that consumer responsiveness piece. Talking to your customers is so important. And a lot of food businesses get themselves into a hole where they're kind of living in a silo and they forget to keep getting out there and talking to their customers and finding out what they want. But then also proper financial, diligence of like always thinking ahead what your cash needs are going to be. If you're launching new products or doing new things, it's going to cost money before you make money. And that's just the reality of the way that a industry like this operates. And it's a really easy thing to lose sight of, because it's not the fun part, quite frankly, if you're not like a CFO kind of person. And so those are the two things I would tell another business, like, hey, look, just focus on your customer for direction, and then focus on what it's going to cost to meet their needs and solve their needs, and be really transparent about what that's going to cost, and plan for it. Those are my 2 cents.
Really, those are, I echo both of those, Joni. I'd say that those are the top two. We've said this over and over in the show, that making sure that your brand says exactly what you're about and being true to that mission statement is so important when encountering any fork in the road. And the COVID response is no exception. So I would echo those. Again, I am the finance person, and I'm very much sold on, and in the last 2 years in this food company, it's helped over and over, that building a stable company allows you to react to everything around you. So the very first thing is to make sure that you've got, to the extent you can, experts handling areas of the company that are better than you at handling those pieces, and having a strong team, having a strong culture, and having a culture that trusts each other. That creates a high performance team that's adaptable and flexible. When you get to one of these crisis situations where it can be very good, our sales are up 200%. I'm not complaining, but it was a tremendous challenge. And being able to focus on what needs to be done requires a CEO to be able to step back from the fray. Because if you're in there every day, with your chef hat on, and you're in the factory and you're making collection calls, and you're presenting new stores, you start to not being able to see the forest for the trees. And
Yes.
so it is super important to step back and make sure that you understand what's happening around you and which direction you need to go. Sort of step back from the fog of war and make sure that you are maintaining enough distance to have a perspective. That's where the great ideas come. The great ideas come from the quiet, when you're able to step out of the war and really figure out what's happening, and then give what is so desperately needed from the CFO, which is direction. Where are we going? Which flank are we attacking, and how do we go out and get that? And I think that there are a million things to look at, but what Joni said, and adding those two around stability and having a CEO that tries to separate are very important.
Yeah, Scott, that's such a good point, because I could say honestly, the last couple of months, I've been that CEO you're talking about. That's like, I'm the general that's in the trench, and I've been the general in the trench, and it's really hard because you can't see the battle. And so, again, it's having those team members, and, as a startup, you don't have them yet, like you're so small, but that's the beauty of building a really high quality team, is suddenly you have somebody to say, no, you're looking at this wrong because you're fatigued, you're battle fatigued. Come up here and let's think about this objectively.
Yeah.
And you need those fresh air team people that can really talk frank with you about those things. So Scott, that's wisdom right there, like straight up wisdom.
I wish I could make a day for you between Sunday and Monday.
Me too.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, like Tim alluded to, we are out of time, but just want to thank you, and what a great way to close it, that the power of a strong team, of perspective, of a moment to reflect on what's happening in your business, in your life, And it's really, it's just inspiring to hear, even, you know, a few months into this obviously really challenging time, that you've got that opportunity to step back and reflect, Joni, of just what's worked and what hasn't, and what are the adjustments to make. And I think, you know, at its one of the values that I know Trailhead and the Venture College really try to embody is that idea of a community. You know, that even beyond just your company, you have a community of people that you can lean on and share ideas with, get feedback, and hopefully improve as a result. And you know, I think Joni and Scott, just appreciate your involvement in that community and your leadership in that community for quite a long time. And you're two that we definitely point to when we talk about what success can come from being a member, you know, looking to others, and then eventually others looking to you. So thank you both for making time today. Really appreciate everything that you've shared with us in this discussion. As we always do, we will be sending out follow-up to this with information about the next session, as well as some information about these companies so you can learn some more. In the chat, there's a link to go get your melt butter and cheese, and we'll share the same with the Snacktivist link on the website. One quick note, next week we had planned on pulling some folks from the SBA in to discuss the follow-up session of the PPP loans. We got in touch with our partners at the Idaho Women's Business Center, and they're actually hosting a session at the same day and time on the same topic. So Tim and I are going to take the day off, and we're going to point everyone their direction so that there's one consistent source of that information. We'll share that flyer and all the sign-up information in our email afterwards. We'll be back on the 23rd with Trill Pollen, the founder of Free to Feed, and Crave Delivery, a new startup here in Boise. And we're really excited to hear from both of them and just continue this community and this discussion with early stage startups. So with that, we will close for today, and just want to thank everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Tim.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you both, Scott and Joni.
Thanks so much.
Great meeting.
Bye.
Yeah, it's
Bye-bye.
been fun. Great seeing you guys. Take
Likewise.
care.
You too. See you in
Bye.
Boise soon. Bye
Yes,
for
I
now.
hope. I'll let you know when I come. Bye.
Good. Bye.
See ya.